Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today's webinar. Each of our organization's main focus is generating revenue. In order to do so, it's imperative we find a competitive advantage. Organizations usually look for the next best marketing or ticket sales idea, but sometimes we miss what is right in front of us. As part of the National Sports Forum's Best Practices webinar series, this webinar will focus on understanding how your organization can gain a competitive advantage with people, as well as discuss the importance and impact of diversity within your organization. Let's introduce our dynamic duo of panelists, and of course me as this webinar's moderator. We are excited that Dr. Keith Harrison from the University of Central Florida and Matt Kittle from Teamwork Online are joining us today. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them multiple times in my own career journey, but all of our paths crossed through Ron Seaver and the National Sports Forum. Keith, please introduce yourself to our webinar guests.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Keith Harris, an associate professor at the University of Central Florida, and one of the founding board members on the Business of Diversity in Sport and Entertainment for the National Sports Forum. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Keith. Now let's hear a little bit from Matt.
Hi, this is Matt Kittle. I'm the Chief Growth Officer with Teamwork Online. Very excited to be here and be able to speak with Dr. Harrison, Christina, and with my role with Teamwork, I assist in everything from revenue generation to executive search to our major consulting projects with clients.
Awesome, Matt. And last but not least, I will be serving today as today's moderator. My name is Christina Wright. I currently serve as Assistant Director of Human Resources at the NCAA. My path has been college sport, from student athlete to intern to GA to full-time administrator. I also serve as chair of the National Sports Forum Business of Diversity in Sports and Entertainment Committee, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means today. As a general practice, we're going to share some basic principles for today's topic to get us started. So first of all, each organization is different. This webinar is about best practices. It's a forum for us to share ideas, ask questions, and take this information back to our respective organizations. This is a safe space, but please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the NSF website for those who are unable to join us today. Diversity has many definitions. For the purposes of this webinar, diversity is defined as any characteristic, perspective, or approach to work that different individuals bring to the workplace. It includes visible and non-visible characteristics such as age, race, color, abilities, appearance, ethnic or national origin, sexual orientation, lifestyle, marital or family status, religion, language, or even education, profession, job function, or social class. The sports and entertainment industry traditionally has focused on gender and race and ethnic or national origin. But everyone participating today is diverse and brings something to the table. That something leads us to our last shared principle. Diversity impacts the bottom line. Yes, each one of us can impact the bottom line. When people feel respected and their differences are accommodated rather than ostracized, they are better able to realize their full potential and make a meaningful contribution to the workplace. An environment that is positive and motivating for its people increases worker satisfaction, productivity, and retention. In addition, the broader perspective of diverse teams facilitates innovation and provides stakeholders with increased value. Diversity in the workplace simply makes good business sense and can bring about many benefits, including some of the following. You have better marketing and customer service through a better understanding and accommodation of diverse customer groups and their needs. You have improved employee morale, performance, and productivity through equitable workplace practices that select, develop, and treat people based on merit and fairness. You have improved retention and cost reductions due to lower absenteeism and turnover, improved ability to attract and recruit top talent, reduced risks of discrimination lawsuits, improved corporate image, and increasing your public goodwill, and last but not least, improved employee creativity, problem solving, and decision making through effective management of diverse perspectives and creative conflict. Now that we shared the basic principles, what's the WIIFM? That's the what's in it for me. As David Freeberg said, innovation is the only sustainable competitive advantage a company can have. Many of us travel to the forum to learn the who, what, where, when, why, how of generating revenue. Innovation happens when there is diversity, and that's what today is about, how to leverage diversity in your organization to gain competitive advantage. As we said earlier, we are all different. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Diversity is not solely a gender culture issue, but one that includes varied perspectives. Yet gender often is one of the most contentious of the topics when looking at the demographics of distribution of wealth, education, and managerial roles. BDSC believes forming a team of diverse individuals is just the beginning. The real value comes when team members use their varying experiences to put a different idea or perspective forward for consideration. To set the stage, we've asked panelists Dr. Keith Harrison to briefly describe the overall grades for the major sports entities, excluding the NHL or the National Hockey League, from the most recent racial and gender report cards. Keith?
Sure, and we'll start at the top. I mean, when you look at the history of the Women's National Basketball Association, they didn't have to integrate when you look at race in comparison to the male side. So quite naturally, it started out more diverse with women of color and obviously women in general, so they received an A+. The National Basketball Association, from a leadership role, has always been above the mean in terms of people of color being head coaches. And we know the statistics of American-born players, African-American-born players are around 77%, and the international demographic is strong for the NBA. And then the other three major leagues that received a B: Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the National Football League, and then last is the NCAA with a C. Just briefly, I think, looking at the data, one of the reasons the NCAA had a C, there's been improvement at the Division I or FBS and FCS level of coaches of color overall about the last decade. But when you look at the representation of men of color at Division II and III, it's low. And then also the big elephant in the room is Division I women's basketball coaches. Women as a gender are less than the men that coach at the Division I level. So that summarizes the grades.
Awesome. And Keith, can you briefly talk about where these grades come from?
Sure. The data is collected. All the leagues are cooperative and send in the data. It's also cross-checked with the media guides of each of the leagues and other statistical information to confirm the accuracy.
Excellent. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the NHL is not reported out. The most recent report was almost a decade ago, and there may be more research done in that space. But as you can see, if you have questions about the report card grades, feel free to reach out to Tides, and they can get you more information. So now
Absolutely.
Now that we've set the stage, I'm going to ask our panelists some questions to kick off the discussion. And I want to remind everyone that this is a safe space and that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the NSF website. If a question does come to mind off script, feel free to chat your question in the chat box, and Mackenzie will help facilitate them as they come in. So we'll get started with I think an easy question, but could be hard, is how is diversity important to your role? And we'll start with Keith.
Sure. This is my 23rd year in higher education and sport business management. Many perspectives with this question. Well, first, how I grew up. Diversity is important to me personally. I grew up in an urban neighborhood until I was a young teenager. Then we moved to a more suburban context. And so just those lessons alone gave me the diversity of experience, in addition to being an African-American male in this country, to have a broader lens on what's going on in society. My specific role as a professor at the University of Central Florida, I teach our graduate and undergraduate courses. The VOS is all about diversity. We value diversity not just with race and gender and social class, but also the student-athlete experience, international students. For example, at the undergrad level, when I got here in 2006, we started with 10 students in our undergrad minor, no women. I'm happy to say 9 years later, we have over 400 students in our undergrad minor. We call it minor this major, and 40% of those 400 students are women, and about 25 to 30% are people of color. So in my role, it's important that I understand all types of backgrounds with diversity.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Matt, how about you? How does diversity important to your role?
Yeah, so similar to Dr. Harrison, I grew up in a very unique environment. The suburb that I grew up in outside of Cleveland is Shaker Heights, Ohio, and has been known as being one of the leaders in terms of, in the 60s, in integration, the quote-unquote proper way to build an ideal community. Interestingly enough, if you look in the roots back even 20 years before that, in the historical information, it was like a lot of other places in this country. But that alone gave me the foundation to really understand the value of a very open mind and being open to really anybody and everybody. Really that experience growing up in that community. And what that's helped me understand and how that plays in an everyday role of my role at Teamwork is obviously we help organizations, over 900 of them all through sports, fill roles. But we also work with student groups and help prepare them for the job search. We do consulting projects with some of the most important brands of the entire industry, and it is a concerted effort across everybody to improve their diversity statistics. So I'm able to look at it from a lens a little bit differently, because I also can see directly within my organization and my clients' organizations the impact that a diverse sales force, whether it be education, whether it be communication, whether it be background in terms of race, sex, creed, whatever it might be. I'm able to see that in almost in real time and see how it's impacting our clients.
Great. And both Keith and Matt shared these very personal stories that kind of shaped them when they were younger and growing up. And I think we all have those kinds of stories. I even have a story. If you, when my dad's Air Force, and I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and on the southwest side of the city, I live in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. And so when I transferred schools, my dad had marked ethnic minority on my school application, and I go into class, and for about a month and a half in third grade, I'm failing elementary school. And so they bring my parents in, like typical school administrators would do, and they want to know what the issues are. And it was a quite simple fix. Because my dad marked that I was an ethnic minority, they assumed I was Hispanic, and they put me in an ESL class where everything was taught in Spanish. And I didn't know a single word of Spanish at that time. And so we all have these interesting stories that shape how we look at diversity in our own right. And I would encourage those listeners out there to reflect on that. You know, the way diversity has been important to my role is I wouldn't have the career that I have without understanding that there are multiple people out there and understanding what they're motivated by and what they bring to the table. Primarily now I'm a trainer and developer at the national office, and you know, there's never a one-size-all-fits-all approach to how somebody learns information. How do they become a better leader? How do they become a better supervisor? And so even though all of us have different roles, some of us cross over into each other's territory or lane, we all have the same thing, that without understanding what diversity is first, we can't actually implement it or take action in whatever respect that we have in the business. So the next question would be, many organizations want to create or have goals and targets related to hiring and promotions, like the Rooney Rule. From your perspective, Keith and Matt, are goals and targets good? Why or why not?
Yeah, this is where I think it gets tricky, and I want to, you know, I really enjoyed hearing your story, Christina. Thanks for sharing that. You know, when you think about goals and targets on the negative end, we don't want people to put people in boxes. So they put you in the ESL class because, you know, the census still wants to be able to count where everyone goes, so to speak. And as we know, these things are becoming more and more nuanced and complex with transgender and by ethnic groups. But there's a positive end. I mean, you have to set certain goals, and I'll use the NFL. For example, 10, 15 years ago, they really were not paying attention, or much less, to the female demographic. And now we see a big push to target that demographic, which we know 45% of Super Bowl watchers are women, and even more, closer to 51% attend live action NFL games. So how would that impact a business's goals and what they want to target? Well, women, according to a study by Harvard, make 85% of disposable income decisions in the average American household. How could you not have a goal and target on their purchasing patterns, their decisions? And so they're paying attention. And a great example is the NFL's campaign, "Football is Family." So now the women are included in the discussion, they're included in the imagery, and they are a part of the NFL's goals. And it just makes good business sense. And that's just one example with gender. I don't know if Matt, what he wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on the head. You know, I think setting goals are appropriate as long as they are realistic. And you know, I can't go into exact specifics, but a number of our clients, leagues, etc., have very stringent reporting, and you know, that reporting, they don't necessarily come out and share what their goal is, because for one reason or another they you know, it's a work in progress, but there's real business behind it. And I think Dr. Harrison hit it right on the head. At the end of the day, and Christina led off with it, being diverse is good business because it will help you grow your business. And if setting a goal and increasing the diversity within your organization is going to help you drive revenue, why would we not pay attention to it? So part of that, in my opinion, is you got to have a realistic goal. Some organizations are, you know, they're figuring that out right now, whether it's at a league level or an individual organizational level. But that doesn't just mean, you know, your top group that you interview are at your goal. That doesn't just mean the people at your phone screen are at that goal. If you're going to be committed to the goal, I would suggest, you know, we're working with a client right now intimately, that, you know, you try to carry that goal throughout the entire process when you're reviewing candidates, because you got to look at it in totality. And at the end of the day, yes, the very best person should get the role, but you need to look at it in the lens of what is the very best for our organization. And sometimes somebody with a diverse background that is completely outside of the box of what the, you know, the standard individual is for your organization might be the best for that role, because that's going to help. That's going to be the catalyst to push you to the next level.
And if I could just add, Christine and Matt, you hit it right on the head, and you made me think of an analogy I always use in class when I'm teaching diversity, and I tell the students, you want to obviously be competent, have the business skills, and you also want to understand the inner workings of diversity, not only interpersonally, but for business. So my analogy is, imagine a quarterback that can only throw, and imagine one that can only run. You want to be able to run and throw in the 21st century, and that's to know your business game, but also understand diversity on a high level.
And that's absolutely right, on track with some of the initiatives of the National Sports Forum. Last year at the BDSC Sunday workshop, our keynote speaker, Oliver Luck, who happens to be an executive vice president at the NCAA, he said, you know, we're going to be in a good place when all this progress and all these metrics and targets and goals become so hard to do because we're measuring diversity of ideas and not worrying about all the different ways that people identify themselves in terms of like a checkbox list. Right now, we're still operating in that area. That's the way our business is functioning now. But that end-all goal is making sure that the diversity of ideas are represented around the table, and that's what will make your business grow. That's what gives you the competitive advantage. You know, from a hiring perspective, we came across a situation where a hiring manager had to decide between this person who was super talented, had the right resume, whatever you want to consider right in quotation marks being, had every piece of experience that pretty much could put them as overqualified for the job that they applied for. And then you had the other candidate who, less experienced but hungry to learn, had more of the soft skills that you need in terms of working with different kinds of people. And, you know, most people would be, you know, it's the shoo-in. I want the overqualified person because they're super talented and experienced, but we challenge these hiring managers to think, okay, when you look at situations of the two people, who's easier to teach the hard skills? The soft skills are really hard to teach. And so looking at it from that perspective, you know, that's another element of diversity even from a hiring perspective, and that knowing that this is a journey, that diversity does not happen overnight, and that as both Keith and Matt shared in their examples, that it's a cultural change, and cultural changes take at least 3 to 5 years to start seeing results. So even if you have a target or goal, you may not see the necessary progress, even though in our business everything we want is yesterday, even though it's today. It takes time to make these changes, and we're seeing that even in the work at the National Sports Forum with BDSC. BDSC is going into its 4th cohort, and where we are now to where we were started before BDSC was created are linked. But that's because good people came together with a diversity of ideas to bring resources and development opportunities to a group of people to help grow them, and it continues today. So we'll go on and move on to the next question. I still see no questions out there in the webinar space. So again, if you have a question for our panelists, please feel free to chat that to Mackenzie. I'm going to direct this at Keith first, because you've conducted a lot of research through your role on diversity, leadership, and management issues. What are some new findings or trends that our group of professionals on this call should keep in mind?
I think it's definitely demographics, and you know, I think it's been a few weeks since I published my first guest column in Sport Business Journal, and I talked about using cultural diversity in terms of engaging your business with sport and entertainment. And so, you know, just think about the demographics. One group in particular, Polynesians, should pay attention to that demographic. Junior Seau's book just came out with a book by Trotter on his life. But, you know, as a case example, look at what the Haka dance has done to mainstream events. I mean, this has become the chant for preparation now, from youth levels to high school, community college, and even up to pros. And that's just an example of how we can benefit by paying attention to our differences. You know, I already talked about women as another example. I just think we have to continue to follow which leaders do well, particularly from ethnic minority groups and women. We had movement with that this year. We had Dr. Jen Welter serve as an intern, an inside linebacker coach for the Arizona Cardinals this summer. That was huge. Becky Hammonds was assistant coach for the assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs. And then I do a lot of work for the NFL. We have an annual mobility report on the hiring practices. And if you look this year, I mean, Coach Revere for the Carolina Panthers is 9-0. Coach Lewis, Cincinnati Bengal fans out there, just lost, but I believe they're 8-1. Lovie Smith has Tampa Bay so far headed in the right direction. You know, Coach Tomlin is stable with the Steelers. And so while we, you know, going back to our previous discussion, you don't want to put people in the box that they're a leader of color or a woman. But the reality is when people get those opportunities and they do well, it opens other doors. I mean, an example in college basketball is when John Thompson, the famous former coach of the Georgetown Hoyas, when he won the national championship, the doors open. More people of color and African-American men got the opportunity. We should continue to pay attention to, there's been no African-American win the national title at the FBS level. Michael London won it at the FCS level several years back at the University of Richmond. So those are just some of the things we could pay attention to. I mean, I kind of picked the leadership role.
Yeah, I mean, even in this day and age, we are in the college space. Judy McLeod is the first female commissioner of a football bowl subdivision conference, and it's 2015. And I know that there are a lot of eyes on her right now, and you know, she's been very gracious as she's come into that role, that she was prepped and prepared and mentored by the right people for that, to get her ready for that opportunity. And so there are lots of examples out there on what Steve has shared. Nat, how about you? Perhaps not from the research perspective, but maybe from a hiring perspective, what are some best practices that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, so I mean, one piece of interesting news that I'm not sure if people have seen, but I believe about 2 weeks ago, the British Prime Minister David Cameron announced that moving forward, names are going to be removed from any UK job or college application, specifically because he wants to reduce racial bias. He spoke with a young African-American woman who essentially said she changed her name to a more white-sounding name, and she began to receive more calls back for interviews. You know, it's interesting to me to see, you know, a leader of one of the more progressive nations in the world taking a step like that. You know, is that going to trickle down to other places? It may. And I think the way to consider this, you know, what I always encourage our clients to do when they're hiring, what I encourage our staff to do when they're helping our clients specifically, is review candidates just from that standpoint, especially if you're reviewing you have a piece of paper usually off. I would always take their name out of it. We always are looking for a way to get our list of 150, 200 people who apply to a role down to a manageable list. But again, you never know. The human nature is to try to compare and contrast and figure out a way to achieve something with the path of least resistance. So, you know, what's happening over in the UK is an interesting concept. I think from a best practice standpoint, you know, Dr. Harrison, again, he hit it right on the head. When one individual of a diverse background, whoever they might be, is given an opportunity, you know, it's their job to succeed, but they need to be prepared for that success, and they need to understand that success is going to be measured. And that's regardless of, again, race, background, whatever it might be. But again, the business of having a diverse background and best practices, I always suggest that our clients, the way we look at it from a diverse standpoint is if you're looking to hire somebody who is the head of revenue and you believe that you need somebody who, let's say you're a professional, say you're an NFL team, and you feel like this person needs to have the majority of their experience in ticket sales, well, you're having them head of revenue. How important is that they understand how revenue is impacting premium, partnerships, special events, all these other things? And for the simple sake of you need to have conversations with individuals who have overseen and have maybe a greater experience level in some of those other areas, because what I have seen in 90% of the searches that we do, whether it's an executive level or lower, usually when you present diverse candidates, and I'm not talking about racially or gender diverse, but if you just look at a diverse candidate based on their skill sets that are slightly outside of what the client is saying they specifically want, 9 times out of 10, the client ends up picking something not what they originally told us they wanted, because those candidates that have diversity in their experience in some way, shape, or form help open up their mind and help them realize, hey, maybe there's a little bit of a different way we can look at this, and maybe if we take somebody with an amalgamation of all these different experiences in their life, they might really help propel our organization to a different level.
Yeah, and I would say I would be interested in seeing how the UK and how that shows up, because I mean we see it on our end too. That I mean, how many times do you see a resume with a familiar name and you call somebody off their reference list? We all have biases, and I think it would be something to watch very closely, because that may be something that would be beneficial over here. People talk about diversity and inclusion efforts are about making sure that each and every member of your organization can take the knowledge from the experience they've had and then use them to benefit the organization. Some of the trends now are related to why and how people manage the disclosure of personal information, which is kind of scary and dicey in some ways, but really high quality relationships and new innovative ideas are a result of people sharing things about themselves and their experiences, and that goes to having like a warm and open and safe environment. There's always a risk that comes with that, but there is potential for rewards, and what it does mean is that when you want everyone to bring their full selves to the table, but it also balances. You have to balance that with expectations of professionalism. We do have an awesome question from the audience for our panelists. So how would you suggest implementing diversity into our classrooms? Is there specific things we should have our students as well as future professionals in this field learn, know, interact with? This person does a short workshop on cultural competencies, but they're not sure that's enough. So again, the question is, how would you suggest implementing diversity in our classrooms as to the students, perhaps, of future professionals in the sports industry?
Well, it's so funny that question got asked. I was recently asked, along with Scott Buckstein, my colleague here at DeVos, to head up the educational curriculum for Stephen Ross's new institute, the Ross Institute for Equality in Sport. And we're putting in the final touches on the curriculum to pilot with high schoolers ages 14 to 18. And so I bring that up because that's going to segue into what I've tried to do at the 4 universities I've taught at, is popular culture is important. The millennials, as they are called, the Gen Yers, they have so much access to information. They've been labeled smarter because they have this type of information, and they're very visual, has been my experience. So I use film, I use all types of platforms to push the message of diversity, because that's something they can get their hands on, and it engages them. I use YouTube. I mean, I've shown a YouTube clip about a particular issue, and we've debated it in class for over an hour. And so they're doing the right thing with cultural competence. I mean, we want, that's the goal, but you have to figure out what are going to be the practical access points that they're going to leave your classroom with and be able to implement. And I'll give one quick example. There's a whole body of research that broadcasters are biased when they call women's games and when they call men's games, whether it be race or gender. And one of the things I always tell the students is after a diversity class, at least they'll have some tools to inform the dialogue when people stereotype women or stereotype white athletes or black or brown athletes. They'll have the information and the objective empirical data based on theory to challenge their peers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. And you know, I've done a little bit of teaching. I'm an adjunct professor at Georgetown and spoken in a number of courses. And obviously, you know, Dr. Harrison can run circles around me all day on the academic side. But what I would say is, you know, I encourage the professors that I know when I'm asked this question that, you know, obviously you got to put it in context of what's important to them, and you know, especially the students right now, the millennial generation, the ones that are in school right now, they are very visual. They are connected to their cell phone. It's basically part of their brain, as it's becoming, I think, a lot of ours. But to me, again, I go back to I like to keep things really, really, really simple. And, you know, the business of sport, even if you're at a nonprofit organization, the business of sport is centered around revenue. And that's not a bad thing. We don't need to think that people are greedy if it's centered around revenue, because you can do a lot of really great things with revenue. But one way I think you can make that connection, and Dr. Harrison was talking about it, if you do some research and you see, you know, that the viewership of the NFL is as high as it is in female viewership. I mean, look at fantasy football right now. There is an insane amount of female interest in fantasy football. And part of that is because their male counterpart, significant other, whoever it might be, is doing it, and they want to share time with their significant other or brother or whatever it might be. And another part of it is that, like, I got a news flash for a lot of the guys out there that think that they can be the next GM of whatever team it is. A lot of these women can run laps around us. So, you know, it makes good business sense. So I think looking at unique case studies and making it applicable to everyday experiences and showing that, you know, having those conversations, I think it all starts with a dialogue and making people understand that, you know, I would go as far to say that right now, as a nation, we are probably, I personally believe, my personal belief, not speaking on behalf of the team, we're probably a little more sensitive than we should be, and we're always border on the line of political correctness. And the more that we can have real conversations and open people up to having real conversations about things, and the correct way to talk about it, then people aren't necessarily as sensitive to it. They can sympathize. They may not be able to empathize with other people, but they can sympathize with them in a lot of cases.
That's excellent.
Matt, those are great responses. You know, you have to start somewhere, and I think preparing future leaders and exposing them to different elements of diversity, you can influence them by even ways of what ideas you bring in front of them and have them think of non-traditional things. So instead of always having a conversation about the revenue-generating sports, talk about the tough sports, because if you can figure out the tough ones, that's where you demonstrate skill. That's where you demonstrate talent. If you can solve the problems of corporate sponsorships of NASCAR, that's a whole lot tougher, I think, in my personal opinion. But we do have another question from the audience, and this one's directed at Matt. Teamwork Online was founded in 1999. Somebody is looking you guys up and has since become a premier matchmaker for job seekers and sport organizations. However, our audience member attended a historically black college or university, HBCU, and spoken with students at other colleges. There doesn't seem to be a great amount of awareness among college students at HBCUs. Is this a challenge that Teamwork Online is combating from a marketing awareness among job seekers at HBCUs or maybe even HSIs, Hispanically serving institutions, and what steps, if any, does Teamwork Online take to ensure all job seekers are using the site? So I think this is broadly saying, how does Teamwork Online reach diverse audiences for job seekers?
Right. Great question. So historically, we have our founder, Buffy Philippel. A little bit of background on her for those that may not know. But when you talk about somebody of a diverse background who has had to prove their worth and fight their way, she fits the bill. She was the first female sports agent that really we know of. She worked at IMG when IMG was just getting started. You can tell lots. She doesn't publicly talk about this a lot, but she has very interesting stories of when she was at IMG in the very early days. They would have business meetings over at a club in Cleveland called the Cleveland City Club, and she had to walk in the back stairs. She couldn't walk in the front stairs with the rest of the executives, and she was an executive. She oversaw some of the most important female tennis athletes and golf athletes at that time, and she was relegated to walking up the back stairs. So, her goal in starting Teamwork, and it's one of our mantras, is we want to equal the playing field. Sports is known as being, and it still very much is, but sports even in 1999 was known as being a fraternity, and we talk a lot about a fraternity, at the National Sports Forum. But even at that point in time, it's really about who you know, and what we try to do at Teamwork is, again, equal that playing field. What we've done is we work with special interest groups like Women in Sports and Events. There's actually been several minority-based special interest groups that have changed names and kind of grown and disbanded and so on and so forth over the past couple of years, specifically in and around minority candidates. And one of the things that is a goal of ours to increase is historically black colleges. Perfect example being, I actually have an intern right now who attended a historically black college. And I've spent a lot of time with him understanding, and he grew up in Cleveland, and he's known about us before he went to school. But in talking with him about how is he made aware of different opportunities in sports, one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that some people don't realize that who Teamwork is. They think that we're just running completely in the background. They've maybe applied to 3 or 4 or 5 jobs through Teamwork, but don't realize that Teamwork is the avenue they've applied. So creating a little bit of awareness of, hey, we are a resource out there is key, and developing stronger relationships with a number of these institutions that are serving diverse backgrounds from a historical perspective is a key initiative of ours. We're always trying to figure out the correct way to do it, and we're trying to figure out the most efficient way to do it too. So I'm not sure if that 100% answers the question that was asked, but it's an initiative of ours. We are focusing on it, and the way we're focusing on that is we are going out proactively, reaching out to these institutions, trying to develop relationships with the different professors in and around sports management or business, and just making them aware that we're a resource. And that even includes institutions like American Military University, any of the universities that are serving our veterans that are doing continuing education while they're overseas serving. We're also doing we also have initiatives centered around those areas.
Great, Matt. Matt's answer talked about awareness and access. And usually those are 2 things that come across in any part of diversity work is, what people have access to and if they're being groomed or grown. One of the things to understand diversity a little better is thinking about the history of why we have diversity efforts in the first place. For many organizations, diversity efforts are rooted in equal employment opportunities and affirmative action programs. So in the House of HR, that was the precursor to the diversity and inclusion programs that we see today. And with that, a lot of people who hear diversity automatically think affirmative action or EEOC without really separating diversity and inclusion efforts. And so, you know, I do think that there are a lot of programs out there that target towards HBCUs or HSIs, but the reality is there's two things. One, that there are diverse individuals on every single college campus. Some, it may not be as specific to gender and race and ethnicity, but there is diversity amongst our college campuses and institutions. And then the other thing is, you know, you really have to have an organization who makes it part of their philosophy, their mantra, their culture, that they want to serve a diverse population, like teamwork. Because the other thing is going back to motivators of what's in it for me. When you have an open position and 7,000 people apply for it, what's the incentive to increase efforts to make awareness of positions? And I'm not saying that that's the right approach, but I'm sure Keith could comment on, you know, the awareness piece as well as the access piece of getting a job in the sports industry. Keith?
Yes, I mean, just reflecting on Matt's great points, I mean, accessing the sport industry in a way that's, I'm going to say, totally fair. I always tell the students that even with the great work that Matt and Buffy do at Teamwork Online, sometimes people know who they're going to select by the time those things are posted. And so what we try to teach the students is the R word, to build that relationship so that people are more comfortable with them just based on who they are as a human being, to put themselves in a position to have an opportunity to interview and show what they can do, and hopefully they become selected and perform.
And so we're, again, these are awesome questions from the audience. So if you have additional questions, again, feel free to chat them over to Mackenzie. The next question really drives at what this webinar was talking about in the first place, is what is the competitive advantage of having a diverse workplace? So why are we spending so much time this afternoon talking about diversity? And at the end of the day, we said, you know, diversity leads to innovation. Innovation keeps you relevant and generates revenue. So, but there are some broader things that come with competitive advantage. So to our panelists, again, what do you think is the competitive advantage of having a diverse workplace?
So, you know.
Well, I'll go for, Matt, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to give a historical example, which Christine's made great points throughout. This example will be a little bit diverse in thought with what something Christina said, that diversity takes time, which it does in most instances. But I think when it comes to sport, it doesn't. The best example is 1970. The USC Trojans went to down Alabama, and they beat them pretty badly. And Sam Bam Cunningham, the running back, had over 100 yards. He had touchdowns. And Alabama's team was all white. The University of Southern California's team was diverse. And the next season, Wilbur Jackson suited up at running back, an African-American player for Alabama. The point is, prior to that game, no one saw evidence of the advantage of having a diverse workforce in terms of the context of a college team. And I always like using this example inside and outside the classroom, because during that game, before it ended, Alabama fans that were all white were chanting, "Get us one, get us one." And so if we fast forward today, you'd be hard-pressed to find an SEC team like Alabama without many African-American players, particularly on defense. And so that human resource, and that in this example is African-American, you could use others. In baseball, you can use Latinos, Hispanics, people of Latin descent, is by allowing different groups access to your brand. I'll put it out there for the sport business folks. You're going to naturally have more people that can help you compete at the top level for performance, however you define that. So that's my example historically, why you want to always pay attention to emerging markets.
Yeah, I think that's a good lead-in to kind of, you know, the lens that I would say we need to use, and the reason I say lens is, you know, having a diverse force and a diverse group within your organization, it does, in my opinion, one really simple thing. I like to try to keep things super simple, and that one simple thing is it gives a unique lens for you, especially as our, you know, people are out there managing, for you to see how folks are looking at things. And so, you know, does it make sense if you are a MLS team in either the southeastern or southwestern part of the United States, or in Texas, obviously, central southern part of the U.S., if you want to say that? Does it make sense for you to have no one on your staff that speaks Spanish? Like, that just doesn't make business sense. But also think about it from a cultural standpoint, and think about it from the standpoint of who is your fan base. Does it make sense for you to not have one you know, homogenous-looking group, and you can't really define who people are, and everybody starts to run in kind of the same vibe? Or does it make sense for you to try to emulate what your fan base is in certain ways? And what that does is that it allows you to look at things through the lens, hopefully, of your constituents, your fans, your student athletes, whatever it might be. And at the end of the day, you know, you never really know the perspective what those people have always gone through. And I give an example of, you know, some of the folks that we've brought on to work with us at Teamwork, very, very, very diverse backgrounds. I've got a person specifically that you know, was born in a different country and has lived in 3 other countries, and she's lived in the Middle East, and she's lived in a couple other places and went to school in the U.S., and her perspective on things is unbelievable. And the ability to use her as a sounding board, to use other folks in our office as a sounding board, allows me as one of our senior staff members to, instead of thinking at things from our business perspective, and I'm not just talking about the conversation diversity or how do we get to an HBCU or anything like that. I'm just talking about, you know, if we're talking to a client and how do we pitch them on something, using them as a sounding board sometimes and saying, how would we go about doing this? Or even from a cultural standpoint, you know, I know enough to know what I don't know, and if I walk into a meeting with somebody that is from the Middle East, you know, I'm fortunate enough that I have somebody on my staff that understands how I should be going and greeting people and the common terms I should be using and how I should dress as you know, somebody from the U.S. talking with those individuals. I mean, it's invaluable. It's absolutely invaluable.
Great points.
Yes, great points. You know, I think that we can see many instances. I mean, even if we go outside of business and still stay in sport, you can see the expansion of, like, I don't know how many of you out there are soccer fans, but the German national team recruited one kind of player for many, many years. It was their tradition. They all looked alike, similar profile, similar style of play. And at one point, there was a decision to diversify what players were on their team, and now they're one of the best, if not the best, teams out there. And so, again, those things didn't happen overnight. But, you know, expanding your common boundaries and celebrating the differences, knowing that the similarities are there, but knowing that the different perspectives, the different experiences different languages. There's a great book out there, since Keith threw out some books. Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. It's a mannerisms book. It's one of my it's pretty thick, a little pricey, but they have them for different countries and different continents even. But it's a great resource because, you know, there are signs of respect that we have that are very disrespectful in other countries. And so having those perspectives at the table, like Matt said, and as Keith said, you know, help your business relationships and help build that competitive advantage. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, what resources would you suggest in recruiting and hiring diverse talent? And so I know we touched on some of this already, so if there are any additional things you, Keith and Matt, you want to add, we'll hear that now.
I'm going to definitely let Matt go first on this. Matt, that's your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I would say, again, you got to keep it simple. And what you have to realize is that if you are committed to diversity and you are committed to hiring diverse talent, again, let's put the context of diversity as, you know, not just, you know, gender, not just race, but let's look at other areas. Let's open it up a little bit more. You have to be, if you're going to be committed to it, then you have to keep it simple, but go after centers of influence in specific areas that you feel you need to increase your diversity in. And whether that's, you know, women in sports and events because you're committed to you know, that aspect and increasing your female diversity, you know, go after those, develop a relationship. You don't just have to use people like Teamwork. We have relationships with these people, but, you know, I know some people that might be shocked about this, but we have over, you know, we'll have over 16,000 jobs posted this year on Teamwork Online. It's hard for me to call women in sports and events every time a job is posted and say we have a job.
Mm-hmm.
So we've automated a lot of that. So I would, again, keep it very simple. I would develop a short list of who you feel are attacking those communities that you want to focus on. If you don't know who that short list is, then ask resources like us or ask resources like other organizations out there. And you develop a personal relationship with them too, because it will dramatically help your brand, especially within those unique communities, if you're able to do that. And if you have the relationship, you don't just you know, try to go into LinkedIn or try to go into an online resource that's informal and do that.
You know, I see this in our space a lot, and as Matt was talking about, you know, I see it from the perspective of maybe some of you all aren't in the positions yet to be in the hiring seat, but maybe you are the job seeker. And one of the things that I challenge my students and my colleagues in sports to do is figure out what you want to do, find the people who are doing it, and map out what it is that they have in common. So I have a pocket list. In college athletics, you'll hear that an AD leaves, who's on the short list, the pocket list of the next person you want to call up for the job. How do you get on that pocket list? And so I have a pocket list of ADs that I respect, that I want to be like. And when I mapped out their profiles, I found that all of them were former student athletes. All of them had served on a NACDA or NACDA flavor committee. All of them served on multiple NCAA governance committees, either association-wide or Division I. And all of them somehow found their way to serve on the Division I men's basketball committee. So now if I want to emulate and be them, I know that this is the kind of profile and opportunities I need to seek on my own. And then on the other side, there are plenty of great examples in all aspects of sports, but one of my favorite is the discussion of Kevin White at Duke, the AD there. And there's articles you can Google that talk about his tree. people he's coached and mentored that have gone off and done great things, and his tree continues to expand. And the same thing can be applied to coaching. And so who are those individuals who are real champions of the kind of work and workplaces and cultures you want, and then map it out. And then that, again, helps you define who you're going to be looking for when you're in the seat of a hiring position. Ron Seaver is part of the cause. A few years ago, two of our committee members approached Ron and said, hey, you know, when we look around the National Sports Forum, we lack diversity. And that wasn't just a comment of gender or race, but there were a whole lot of conversations about what that really meant. And so Ron created BDSE, established a committee. Keith was part of that inaugural committee, and BDSE was born. And what BDSE is, this committee selects 32 rising stars, diverse individuals, to come to the National Sports Forum in February and meet and greet and get access to people they probably wouldn't have access if they stayed wherever they were, and get some education as well, as the forum has a ton of different workshops and seminars on revenue generating ideas across sport. And so as a mini commercial for the webinar, I would say that our scholarship application is due this Friday, November 20th. We do have a few open spots left for Portland, and the scholarship includes a complimentary attendee badge, which is about $1,700 worth, so it's a big deal, as well as the BDSE Sunday workshop and the forum itself. And so if you are a diverse sports professional, or if you know of rising stars in the business, please feel free to send them our way, whether it's to me or Mackenzie at the National Sports Forum. And so I just want to double check, we are over on time. And we did answer some questions from the audience, as I don't see any additional ones. But on behalf of the National Sports Forum, thank you all for joining us today for the Best Practices webinar series of Finding Your Competitive Advantage Through Diversity. Have a great day.